Well, Dr. Bob here. Montana's been a little rough on me through this COVID thing. Back in March, I came down here to work. There was no COVID at all in Montana at that point, and really there wasn't any in Alaska. And while I was working in Montana, the governor enacted a 14-day quarantine to anybody returning to the state. So I got stuck quarantined for 14 days at home when I got home. And of course that actually got my YouTube kicked off because I had nothing to do. I was going crazy. I had to cancel all my patients, couldn't work in urgent care. Cost me plenty of money. And but I learned how to do YouTube videos and kind of upped my game a little bit and started sharing a little bit more information with you guys. So I always try to look for the bright side of everything. Well, you know, I did that pretty long COVID video, and I'd encourage you to go watch it because I studied the epidemiology for a couple weeks, drew some conclusions that I thought were logical, the way my brain works in medicine, and I'm pretty much dead on. I'll cite some examples as we go through all of this. This will be another long one. Well, I finally made it back to Montana because now you can test to get back into the state, right, without quarantining. And the hospital said they'd burn a rapid test on me on my last shift so I could come home. But unfortunately, this time, eastern Montana, rural eastern Montana was having pandemic levels, and I was seeing cases every day. And people pretty sick. I mean, curled up in the fetal position, severe headache, aches, short of breath, people with low oxygen levels, admitting a patient or two a shift. And I caught it. And I don't know how I caught it. I've got some ideas. I mean, maybe it was PPE failure. I'm very diligent. Never been a mask denier. In fact, I thought it was ludicrous when Fauci said that the public didn't need masks, only medical personnel did. That was stupid, right? But they tell you what they want you to hear based on what their needs analysis is at the given time. Let's face it, we're all just a bunch of sheeple. But anyways, so maybe my PPE failed, but I was super diligent. I wore an N95 mask, a face shield. I put a surgical mask over the N95 when I saw patients that were potential COVID patients. We had a negative pressure room that I was in. I wore the whole gown, the gloves. But you know, you're in a hospital. I was working 24-hour shifts, and they were busy because people were sick, and so I was getting a little rundown. That's a risk factor, obviously. Somehow or another, I caught it. This dog might have given it to me. I got to trying to think about where my personal hygiene might have failed. Very diligent about washing my hands. You know, I have a big bottle of Purell. Anytime I touch a doorknob, I think of that hand is contaminated till I get to sanitize it. But you know what? Every day I would come down here. I'm at the Mainstay Suites here in Montana, and I would go down with my dog to make my coffee in the morning and stuff, and everybody pets your dog. And I never really considered the possible fomite transmission. I suppose other possibilities is maybe a hospital staff cafeteria worker might have given it to me because I would eat a salad every night that they would make for me. And I did eat out at dinner one night. Apart from that, if I go in a grocery store, especially because I need to be extra diligent because I can't control my bubble, meaning I might be sewing up a 90-year-old with a scalp lac on one of my shifts, and since that person's very high risk, I had to do everything I could not to catch it. I always wore an N95 mask going to the grocery store. Always sanitized the cart handles. I mean, just super diligent, but I caught it. It's a contagious virus. I'm impressed by that. I'll tell you what else I'm impressed by. I'm pretty healthy. Take a lot of supplements. I'm on some extras now. We'll talk about that. Very, fit, ideal body weight, no medical problems, low blood pressure, no insulin resistance, none of the risk factors. 56 years old, not very old in terms of high statistical probability of having a poor outcome with COVID, but I was sick. Now, it didn't knock me on my butt, okay? It's not like I couldn't get off this couch. But for a couple of days, I felt constitutionally ill. So I'll tell you my symptoms. I might as well share my personal perspective because I think a lot of people blow off the early symptoms, and subsequent to getting it and talking to more people and knowing, since there's a lot more people getting it now, hey, my daughter has it back in Alaska. My other daughter is being tested. Well, anyways, the first symptoms I probably had were fatigue, but I wrote them off because I'm working 24s. So a week ago, Friday, I worked a 24-hour shift, and it was my worst one. I basically didn't get the ER cleaned out till 4:30 in the morning. Got some brief cat naps while I was waiting on labs and stuff on patients. 4:30, I got the ER cleaned out. I slept for an hour and a half, woke up at 6, shift changed at 6:30. Came back here to the room, slept for about 2.5 hours because I didn't want to sleep all day. And when I got up from that nap, I thought, God, I got a headache, and I feel kind of tired and I'm almost a little achy. But I've been doing this for 5 years and 24-hour shifts. When you have a bad one, you don't feel that great the next day. One of the reasons why I went to every third instead of every other. So kind of easy to write that off. That day, the wind was blowing terrible, so the dog and I didn't go hunting until we went out for a walk for about an hour and a half right at sunset because the wind was kind of laying down some. And I mean, when I say laying down, it was like 30 gusts to 50, right? So I'm out in the fields, dry grasses, walking briskly. The next morning, Sunday morning, I woke up with a right there. Just that's it. Nothing else. No scratchy throat, no runny nose, no watery eyes, no GI symptoms. And that kind of just stayed there. But I didn't make much of it, Maybe retrospectively that was a bad job on my part, especially being in healthcare. Now, of course, in the hospital, full protective gear. Didn't expose anybody, meaning, I was not cavalier at all, but I sure didn't think I had COVID at that point. Of course, I'm hunting in between, and hunting's going fine. I'm able to hunt, although, coming up the stairs, this is a 3rd floor apartment, seemed like my legs were a little more fatigued than I would have expected, but gosh, you're working 24s, hunting 2 days in between. There's so many variables that seemed to, you could explain everything off. And I've just talked to other people that had it, and the early symptoms, they were able to explain it to other things. I did the same thing. When I knew I had it, or when I got suspicious, was Thursday, my very last shift, which will be a week ago, day after tomorrow. And I woke up that morning after hunting below a plowed grain field on the downwind side where you could literally see dirt blowing off the field. I woke up that morning, my nose felt impacted. I blew my nose and there was quite a bit of dark, thick nasal discharge. And then it was clean. Could breathe through both nostrils just fine like I can right now. And I thought, okay, well, that was just all the dirt I breathed in yesterday. Went to work, started seeing patients, and at about 4 o'clock, I realized that my nose actually became congested like it would when you had a cold. And that alarmed me. And I made coffee, and then I realized I couldn't smell it. And there was another thing that was kind of funny that I thought about today, which was for a few days, I remember my N95 mask had its own smell. And there's all these remarks about these weird olfactory hallucinations that you get. So I think I was kind of like, I don't remember these masks smelling that way. And then it was funny because I put the mask on to see if it smelt that way anymore after I couldn't smell the coffee, and it didn't. So that maybe was another nasal symptom that I had that I didn't recognize. Never lost taste, by the way, although maybe a little diminished. So anyways, spiked the temp, called the hospital administrator, we ran the test, I was positive, came home, somebody finished the shift, came to the suite here, and the health department's been following me since, and today was my official not quarantined anymore, dating back to my first symptoms retrospectively, which was Saturday, the fatigue, headache, and mild muscle aches, and then Sunday, the that basically is gone now. So the 2 days, so when I had the temp, I had a temp of 100.7 when I took it at the hospital. And I've been following my temperature since March. I try to take it a couple times a day. And, you know, my normal temps are like 96 to maybe every once in a while I hit 98. High 96 to low 98. Well, I had 100.7. And I came home from that shift, slept, best sleep scores I've ever had, 96 to 98% efficiency, sleeping 7.5 hours, which I almost never do. I'm usually about 6.5. So it's a good solution for sleep problems. But anyways, I got a temps of a Tmax of 100.9 was the highest it ever went, and that was that night. And then the next day, for 24 hours, I ran anywhere from normal temperatures, but like 98 somethings, to 99.9 was the temperature I had before I went to bed that night. No, 100.1 the second night, which was would have been Friday night. And then Saturday night, I ran a temp of 99.1 was my highest temp, and basically the last 2 days I've had no technical fever. I've not been out of 99s, and today is actually the first day that, which is amazing because, you know, they've got this dialed in, I guess, on the 10 days. I'm now at normal temperature range for me, meaning I'm testing like 97s every time I take it. The last time I took it here, just before I started the video, I was 97.1. So the symptoms are pretty subtle at the onset. The loss of taste and smell, the smell in particular, is pretty common, I guess, and fairly predictive, I think, also. It got my attention because, as healthy as I am, I felt a little sick. Run down, headachy, mild headache, not splitting, little muscle achy, mild upper respiratory symptoms only. I never got a cough. Listen to my lungs regularly. I know what COVID pneumonia sounds like because I got to hear that on many patients, and never got any lung changes at all, never got short of breath, and I'm basically asymptomatic right now. Why did I not get hit harder? Well, if you go back to my original video, I pointed out that your inflammatory milieu is really important. And I take a lot of anti-inflammatory supplements. Like my fish oil keeps my omega balance proper. So I'm not likely to be overwhelmed by a bunch of inflammation if there's an insult like this infection. And I take a lot of other anti-inflammatory compounds, highly bioavailable curcumin, and I was already on supplements that we know from scientific evidence retrospectively are associated with decreased length and severity of this illness. My vitamin D levels are always above 50. Low vitamin D is a big risk factor. I take melatonin. Seems to be some evidence that people taking melatonin do a little better. I take vitamin C, and I also take zinc. We know that zinc helps reduce viral inflammation. Now, since I got it, and then, you know, I take B vitamins, methylation formula, and since I got it, I got on this immune supplement regimen, which is, I'm not going to go into the science, there's a ton of stuff in it, but a lot of these homeopathic compounds have some evidence that they improve antibody response or cellular immunity. And I want to mount a great immune response and not need the vaccine. You know, I looked up the vaccine, which is encouraging, and of course it was only tested on people with no previous evidence of the infection. So I'm not even probably a candidate for the vaccine anymore right now until they test it on those who have had it, which is probably going to be a while. So they're probably going to rely on, okay, you got it, that's your vaccine. Whether that's going to hold true or not, who knows? Remember way back when I said, you know, when this first came out, they were calling like a 5 to 7% mortality, and I'm like, God, people, this is so much BS. I knew it wasn't 5 to 7%. In fact, I said, you know, it's going to end up being 0.1 to 0.5%, and if I went out on a limb, I'd say 0.3%. And I was right. You know, right now, they're calling it a 0.6%, but they're basing that based on actual known number of cases and the mortality. How many people are dying compared to how many people get it. I'm going to say we're probably missing half the cases. Plenty of people are asymptomatic and never get tested. If we tested everyone, we'd double the number of cases, which would make the mortality 0.3%. So I had pretty good insight into this right from the get-go. That being said, you could make the same argument for flu. If we tested flu as diligently as we're testing this, we would document a lot more flu cases, and the mortality of flu would be lower than the 0.1% that it is now. So this is definitely a more serious viral infection than influenza, I think. And especially given that it hit me, because, you know, I almost certainly have caught influenza at some time in my 25-year career, but it was never severe enough that I knew I had the flu. Meaning it didn't give me the symptoms I'm describing to you guys that I had several days ago. Run down, headache, little muscle achy, not feeling good. I've never had that before. So I'm impressed. It's got my attention. It worries me for the country. I think this is a serious infection. I don't have any idea where it's going to go. I don't know if vaccines are going to be long-term effective, short-term effective, require repeat dosing over and over again. Will immunity be maintained? Is this thing going to burn out? Is the virus just going to become less virulent and become just a regular cold down the road? We just don't know. Scary stuff, really. Sorry I can't be a little more optimistic. I do recommend, if you think you get it and you're an adult, take a baby aspirin every day. A study came out. I already knew that there was evidence that aspirin was associated with better outcomes, but a specific study did come out, and I read it. It happened to come out after I already took my first dose of aspirin. Aspirin use is associated with decreased mechanical ventilation, ICU admission, and in-hospital mortality in hospitalized patients with COVID-19. So basically, this was not a double-blind study. This was a study where a fair portion of the adult population takes baby aspirin for cardioprotective reasons, okay? There's guidelines on whether or not you should be in that group. Well, those people got COVID and then got hospitalized. And so they had an aspirin taking group and a group that wasn't taking aspirin. And the data was pretty impressive. The relative risk if you were in the aspirin group compared to the non-aspirin group was around 50% for each of the different parameters they were looking at. ICU admission, you were about half as likely. In-hospital mortality, about half as likely. Risk of having to be put on a ventilator, about half as likely. So we know that clotting has a lot to do with this. I diagnosed a blood clot in one of the patients that I saw. Take a baby aspirin. Some argument is maybe you should just go ahead and get on, all us adults should just take baby aspirin now until the pandemic's over. There is some bleeding risk to aspirin. That may be a little aggressive, but if you think you got it, I would take it. Definitely, vitamin D levels need to be adequate. Definitely. Zinc, vitamin C, low-hanging fruit, easy, inexpensive, doesn't make sense not to. Having a good inflammatory balance by supplementing with high-dose, molecularly distilled, independent third-party tested fish oil, like our great Synergenics marine fish oil from Alaska pollock, makes sense, okay? That's probably why I didn't feel very bad. I'm very comfortable that that's probably why, one of the reasons why I didn't feel terribly knocked out by this. While we're on the subject of medicine, I've prescribed some hydroxychloroquine to several of my Synergenics patients. I shared in the medical decision making with the understanding that there's no double-blind clinical controlled trials that prove efficacy, but there's doctors screaming from the rooftops, docs that are seeing lots of patients, that it works. And our government has failed us in that they haven't run a double-blind clinical controlled trial for early outpatient use. Because I think we have a corrupted system and it backs the pharmaceutical industry, and hydroxychloroquine is a cheap drug that wouldn't make anybody any money. And I think it became political because the Orange Man said it was going to work, and that created another negative against proving it would work. They did a couple studies in really sick people, and it made them look like they died sooner, which would be the expected result if you gave somebody who was already really sick a drug that prolongs your QT interval and increases your risk of a fatal arrhythmia. And that's what it proved. It was a bad study. That's the only double-blind study that I know of. But here's a meta-analysis of a retrospective study. First, COVID-19 outpatient study based on risk stratification and early antiviral treatment at the beginning of the disease. Hydroxychloroquine at low dose in combination with zinc and azithromycin proved to be an effective therapeutic approach against COVID-19. Significantly reduced hospitalization rates in the treatment group. Reduced mortality rates in the treatment group. Bottom line is what they did, they had to create a cohort that was similar. So they were able to create a treatment group. They didn't have a double-blind control group. So they made one from a similar population demographic that also got COVID and didn't take that stuff. And that's not as good a study as a double-blind, which is what our government should do for us, because I think the stuff works. There was the bottom line was the treatment group, 2.8% were hospitalized, whereas the untreated group, 15% were hospitalized. The treatment group, 0.7% died, and the untreated group, 3.5% died. I prescribed it to several patients that had risks. I didn't take it myself because I felt like I was low risk. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have. Maybe my smell would come back sooner. I don't know. But Everybody I gave it to thought they got better really fast. And a couple of these people were in their mid-70s with high blood pressure. So it's sad that I don't think we practice medicine in a world where there's transparency and application of logic based on the actual scientific data. I hear a lot about we would follow the science. Well, you're going to follow the science of the scientists that agree with what your paradigm is. And that's sad. I worry that external forces affect the appropriate response to this pandemic. And I hope that we do a good job managing this for our population from here on out. Don't be a mask denier. They're not a panacea. Look, I was as careful as could be. I got it. But they work a little bit for sure. Think about your bubble. If you know that you are going to expose people who are at high risk, consider yourself high risk. Okay? If you're a young, healthy family, it's hard for me to say don't let your kids go to school. I figured I was going to eventually get it from my kids, and case in point, my daughter has it. It's going to be too late to give it to me, but you know, she went back to school. I don't know that we can hide from this. I really think the proper strategy is to really hide the high risk while the rest of us slowly, with as much mitigation strategy as possible, go ahead and get exposed. Maybe this vaccine will prove that strategy wrong, but we're still looking at months before it's implemented. Looks like it's going to go to healthcare workers and the elderly first. And I suspect that the horse is going to be way out of the barn before we get fully vaccinated. What we really need to all hope for is that getting this disease does confer a long-term immunity, and we don't know that yet either. One other topic. A lot of people won't ever get it. I'll give you several examples. One of my good friends called me up. I thought, wow, the news travels fast. No, he didn't know I had it. He said, hey, I want to tell you what happened. So he and a buddy, they're in their 60s, went deer hunting. They were driving 15 hours. During the drive, his buddy's driving. He said, man, I feel terrible. You need to take over driving. So he drove the rest of the way. The next morning, the guy was so horrible, he said, you got to take me to the hospital. He got taken to the hospital, had a CAT scan that showed COVID pneumonia, got admitted for 1 day, got remdesivir, and recovered. Now, my friend Bill drove in this car with him for 15 hours while he was clearly symptomatic. They were not wearing masks, 3 feet apart. Bill never tested positive. Talked to another friend here recently. He knows a family where 2 of the kids got it. They were pretty sick. Neither parent ever got it. And the other 2 kids never got it. And they're all living in the same house. A high percentage of us probably have cellular immunity that has enough recognition of coronaviruses that you just don't get the infection. So we're not all going to get it. And it probably doesn't take the entire population to get it before the herd's immune. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Aspirin, if you get it or think you might have it, 81 milligrams is probably the reasonable dose. Make sure your vitamin D is adequate. Probably take some melatonin. It'll help you sleep anyways. Vitamin C, zinc. Zinc about 75 milligrams a day. Vitamin C, 500 milligrams. Fish oil, a couple grams twice a day will give you a good inflammatory balance. If you ever want to know, a high quality probiotic. You know, there's an awful lot about probiotics and how well they help our bodies to deal with viral immunity. We don't understand it at the molecular level, but it clearly is a real thing. I've always been on a great probiotic. You know, I feel very blessed that hopefully I don't look too bad after having got through COVID. I've always felt very blessed that I found Synergenics and how it helped me enhance my health and personal well-being. Who knows where I'd be right now if I was on the trajectory I was 8 years ago, getting heavier, probably eventually going to develop type 2 diabetes, certainly not as physically optimized as I am now, and I was on no supplements back then. I'd probably have poor vitamin D levels now. Maybe I wouldn't have been such a great story. Anyways, good talking to you guys. Looking forward to being home and seeing my family. Sorry this was a long one. I hope it's useful. Thanks. Bye.